Buckley Smith, and you're listening to SLEERICKETS, a podcast about poetry and other intractable problems. So I have two quick announcements, one much less important than the other. First, and less importantly, AWP will be happening next week, Wednesday night through Sunday in Los Angeles. It should be a lot of, or rather, not the conference itself, but all of the stuff happening next to the conference should be a lot of fun, including Wednesday night, the 26th. There will be a group reading at the Count's Den on Olive Street, featuring poets from 32 Poems, Poetry Northwest, and Smartish Pace. A lot of great Baltimore and SLEERICKETS adjacent people will be there, including David Clark, Nita Sofa Saroon, Stephen Reichert, Chris Childers, and a slew of others. I just looked up the venue, the Count's Den. It looks fucking crazy. It looks like, it's called the Count's Den. It looks like maybe where like Dracula's groupies would hang out, maybe like where Aleister Crowley would throw a bar mitzvah. It looks like a wild, really fun venue. Sadly, I will not be there. Joanna will not be there. We've had a family emergency, so we will not be going to LA, but wish everybody who is going a lot of luck, and go check out the Smartish Pace 32 Poems Poetry Northwest reading. It should be a lot of fun, and should be plenty of good people around there. Chris lives near there. Alexis Sears, I think, will be going. Matt Wall is in the area and is apparently really up on all of the contemporary art galleries, like not just the art galleries, but the museums. Like, he's been doing a crazy immersive tour of all of the art venues, like visual art venues in the city. So if anybody is interested in checking any of that out, I would be happy to connect you with him. He is really a trove of information these days on painting. All right. Much more significantly, however, Poetry Says has come to an end. So this has been in the works for a little while now, but if you do not already listen to Poetry Says, go listen to, at the very least, the most recent, the final episode 300. And the two preceding episodes, which are both of them just whoppers, are the two parts of her treatment of poetry, of Paradise Lost. I could never, as I told Alice, I could never have imagined being so eager to hear the second part of a podcast treatment of Paradise Lost. I'm still pretty down on the poem as a whole, but her discussion of it is fantastic, both because it includes a lot more historical and scholarly insights than certainly than my cursory consideration of it did, but it also, she recorded it over many, many months, and so it serves as a kind of a progressive time capsule of her of the half year she spent dipping in and out of this poem, going to discussions of the poem, having longer conversations with Elijah and various other people about it. It's sort of both a literarily worthwhile presentation and a pretty touching personal document. The final episode is short, sweet, and quite beautiful. So Poetry Says is an extraordinary project. Alice has been working on it since, it's been 9 years now. God, 2016. So almost nine years. It's really an extraordinary project. It is up. It will be up. You should go check it out. Go listen. If you have questions about specific recommendations, we can talk more about it. Please feel free to write me or write Alice. She says she is always she's too addicted to her email not to check her poetry. So what's her Poetry Says email? It's poetrysayspod@gmail.com. So go check out the podcast. Rate her an appreciation. Give it a little bit of your time. It is well worth it. And again, those last 3 episodes are just real standouts, but there are many, many before that are extraordinary as well. For those of you who are who are already anxious about missing out on Alice, I have good news. She is on this week's episode of SLEERICKETS, and she will very generously continue to be a part of SLEERICKETS. She is even she 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 very generously jumped in to do a little extra production for me when I was planning to go to AWP. I'm not now, but I'm still going to be using the excellent work that she has done for the show. So Alice will be around here, and I suspect there may be more. I mean, my hope is she will continue to be a really big part of Sleeve Rickets. I also suspect that in addition to that, there may be some other podcasting projects coming from Alice down the road. But for now, Poetry Says has reached, I think, a really elegant conclusion, and it's something you should give a little bit of your time to. This week on Sleeve Rickets, I am discussing an essay that Elijah wrote. So this is a conversation Elijah and Alice and I had about his essay, The Iron Lyre, Lyre, that ran in the New Verse Review. It's as we discussed, it is sort of a manifesto. There's some argument about that, but it is all about how poetry should be more metal. we dig into it pretty thoroughly, I think. In addition to that, there is a shorter essay we talk about sort of tangentially, but I think it is fairly relevant, called Why So Serious, that ran in the New Yorker years and years ago. I mean, not that many years ago, fewer than 10 years ago, by Alex Ross, that I think is quite relevant. I will include links to that, to Elijah's essay. Also, I will include a link to Elijah's new Substack. He has a Substack for Versecraft that includes all of the... So when he does the show, he actually writes essays. He writes an essay for every episode, pretty much. And so he has included almost all of those in text form on this Substack blog. So you can go subscribe to that to read all of his episodes as the essays they were originally composed as. The exception is the ones that treat sort of slightly broader topics, but all of the individual considerations of poets and poems are included. Go check that out. Go check out his essay, The Iron Lyre, the Alex Ross essay, and at Ethan's suggestion, Elijah put together a metal playlist to accompany his essay and this episode. That will be up on the Sleeve Rickets YouTube channel, as well as Elijah made a Spotify playlist. I don't really understand Spotify. Sleeve Rickets is on Spotify, but otherwise it's not. I can't learn another platform. I can't do it. But there will be links both to the YouTube and the Spotify versions of that playlist. So give that a listen. We talk about a whole lot of other things, including what the good of manifestos is, what the harm of them is, how we should think about what poetry ought or ought not to be, what the actual market for poetry is, what it contributes to that, and what sort of manifesto Alice might write in opposition to this one. This is also an episode, in case you have ever wished that Alice would be harder on Elijah. This is an episode where I specifically ask her to do that, and she obliges. It was a pleasure, as always, to talk to both of them, and I hope you will enjoy our conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. We have this big monster essay from Elijah that apparently already got some people exercised on social media, which I heard about only secondhand. And then I sort of nominated as maybe related to it a much older essay from maybe 15, 20 years ago in the New Yorker about trends in classical music concerts, which I do think has some relevance to some of the things you were talking about. But this was an essay you published in New Verse Review. It's called The Iron Lyre, and Lyre, and it is a bomb-throwing manifesto in praise of metalness in contemporary poetry, or sort of asserting or demanding that contemporary poetry get more metal in a few different ways. So you want to summarize it more precisely than that?
It originated out of an observation that much of the super canonical poetry of the past, much of the epic and tragic poetry of the past, has very much what I would consider a metal sensibility. Like the Iliad has a very metal sensibility. There's so much, there's gods and grandeur and crazy violence and just very dramatic things happening and so much discussion of death and bravery and all of these things. And Shakespeare is not Homer, but even in Shakespeare, in the tragedies, you have ghosts and you have vengeance and you have these larger than life characters and these these grand statements, which I think listeners to metal gravitate towards. I think there's a lot of the same appeal there. And so what I was thinking was, well, this was poetry. Poetry was, these epic poems from around the world, almost all of which have this sort of metal appeal. And, poems have continued to have that metal appeal, up until pretty much the modern period. And it's only been, with what I call in the essay the hegemony of lyric, where poetry has identified with lyric, that we've lost some of that. And of course, there are lyric poems that can be metal or that have been metal. And I know you were saying, Matthew, that you saw the essay partly as an attack on lyric. I didn't intend for it to be an attack on lyric.
No, I thought it was an
What
attack on the contemporary lyric.
Yeah, well, and the contemporary poetic culture, which is expressed in lyric, but it wasn't an attack on lyric. It was meant to be basically putting a fire under the ass of contemporary poets, trying to tell them that poetry need not be the way it is now, that we don't have to subscribe to the modernist and postmodernist cant about what can and can't be done, and that I go into why, or at least some explanations for why I think there's been such a decline in epic and verse drama in the last several hundred years, and culminating now where we have almost none of it, or almost none of it being read at least. And so that's something I discussed too, the shame of that, the shame of having these really excellent genres and forms of art that have given us so much that people are just not writing it anymore. The connection with metal is that metal is a thriving genre. It's not pop music, it's not as popular as that, but it attracts millions of listeners all around the world who want something that I think is akin to what was provided by epic and tragic poetry. They want that sort of epic sense of life or that tragic sense of life, and metal can sometimes give that, especially in like a concert setting. And so what I was trying to point out was, look, people still want this stuff. There's still an audience for this kind of art. Why does it have to be confined to music, or even to in terms of literature? Why does it have to be confined to fantasy and sci-fi novels? Like, why can't we have all of this brought back into poetry? And this is poetry's birthright. This is poetry's lineage. And if we are drawing upon and inspired by the greatest works of the past, that is blood that we should be reincorporating back into our own work. And also I talk a lot about the sublime. The sublime is something that, this sense of awe and terror in the face of indescribable or overwhelming forces or truth is also something that I treasure dearly, and which I think is common to these metal poems, and which I also think we could have a lot more of in contemporary literature.
So it is kind of like it is a bomb throwing essay, and I understand that you are being polemical. Like I get it. As I was reading it, I was thinking, like, what is the difference between, like, do you have a goal to persuade? Because you end with a call to action. And I wonder if you think that there's a risk when you write something like the neurotic, self-obsessed, lily-livered state of contemporary poetry. Do you think there's a risk that you are going to entrench people further into their corners and just lose people at that point?
I think I'm trying to articulate a frustration that a lot of people feel, and to reach out to those people and say, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. I think people who are defending the lily-livered state of, contemporary poetry, I almost feel like if you're going to latch onto that, you're almost too far gone for me to reach. Like, if you really believe that contemporary poetry is great and is perfect and it's all going so well right now, I feel like, yeah, we're not going to see eye to eye on this. I'm trying to give voice to what I think is a pretty common frustration, a frustration that is not maybe often articulated, but which is there. And it may even be a frustration which exists largely outside the poetry community at the moment, or even a frustration that people have not articulated even to themselves, but something that they hunger for. Or even to reach out to people who are interested in this kind of stuff, are not frustrated by it necessarily, but the essay, you know, if they read the essay, they'll think, oh, I didn't know that it could be like that. I didn't know we could have that.
Yeah.
And so those are the people I'm trying to reach. I think people within poetry who are frustrated by the current state of affairs, and people who are maybe adjacent to or slightly outside poetry who would be interested in it if it had more of what I'm describing.
It reminded me, setting aside Nazism, it reminded me of that scene in American History X when Edward Norton goes to prison and he knows he's a white supremacist and he has misgivings about various prison gangs, but he sort of knows he has to pick a side. So he goes out in the yard and he takes off his shirt to, you know, hit the bench press, and he's got a giant swastika tattoo on his chest. And what he's doing is saying, like, okay, everybody, this is the side I'm on. And it's a way both of saying, like, not you, as well as saying, like, okay, you guys. And clearly this is not has nothing to do with Nazism, but it does strike me a little bit as like you are throwing jabs at people. You're not here to make friends. You're here to declare an allegiance, and you're here to sort of like to get the attention of people who want to gripe about the same people you want to gripe about, and you're not really trying to appeal to people who might be interested in who might be more ambivalent about it. Like, why listen to songs about urban loneliness or moody navel gazing when Vikings and gods in mortal peril are so much cooler? Is the kind of rhetorical question that like invites both cheers and scoffs, right? Like kind of like you're aware of that, right? So I mean, similarly, like self-conscious irony is ignored as the waste of time that it is, right? Like part of why people will cheer so excitedly at some of this is because it like definitely will be rubbing certain people the wrong way, right? I think it's far more sophisticated than like certain other versions of that we encounter. But it does seem to me like this would not be nearly as effective a manifesto. It would not be nearly as rousing to the audience it's seeking to rouse if it were more diplomatic.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I almost try to embody some of what I'm advocating for in the essay itself, because I think there is a little bit too much diplomacy in the poetry world.
Sure.
And you've said this on many occasions
Yeah.
about how we ought to have more honesty in the critical playing field. And I think that, I mean, honestly, probably listening to Sleerickets has radicalized me a little bit, because I mean, you vent your own frustrations about the poetry world all the time, and not in the same terms, but you know, I've learned a lot about the poetry world from you, and I've been exposed to a lot of it from you, and the frustrations that you vent about it, I find very relatable and reasonable. And of course, I have my own take on it. I have my own personality. I have my own way of writing. But yeah, I feel like there have been seeds that have been planted, and it's justified. This frustration is justified. Yeah. So even people who are going to be alienated by this, that's fine. Come at me then. Like, like I want to provoke people into more honesty, even if you're against me.
Totally. So can I do my Sleerickets jujitsu on you now?
Sure, yeah.
Which is that I think I like this essay. I disagree with a lot of the specific claims in it, but I also don't read it as a rational argument. I read it as a dramatic monologue in which effectively it is a lyric expression of a sense of frustration as well as excitement at a certain possibility.
Yeah, I'll take that. I'm open to all kinds of readings of it, and if people are excited about it or curious about it, I'm happy for them to engage.
Yeah, I mean, once I had picked myself up off the floor, deleted all my poems, and cried for a few days, I thought, okay, what does this look like then? So you say, I can give my all to the question. If you are a poet, you should too. What is that quest? I really need to know practically what is the next step? What do you want to see in very specific terms? What do you want to see exist that is not here now?
Well, I would like to see poets go for the fences in terms of the kinds of projects they're working on.
So longer? You want them to be longer?
I mean, maybe some of them longer. It would be great if we had more long poems, but it doesn't mean that if you're a poet, you have to write long poems. I think that we should make space for epic and verse drama to exist. I wish there was a market for it, and I talk about that in the essay too. But even in lyric, I wish that people were more concerned about the intellectual integrity and ambition of their poems.
What does that mean?
I want people to write about things that are, universally, eternally important, and to have real things to say about them. I want poets to constantly be reading, constantly be educating themselves, challenging themselves to equal the greatest poets we have. And not everyone's going to write the same. I don't want everyone to write the same kind of poetry, but the poets who are out there, I want them to learn their craft really damn well, and I want them to read all the time, and I want them to treat poetry as if we are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. I don't believe that we are, but that's sort of what you have to, that's the mind state you have to put yourself in, I think. And I don't like want more of this grandstanding political sloganeering poetry. I don't mean legislators in that way, but people who are offering something really valuable that can stand the test of time, not who are trying to get a certain cheer from one group or another, or virtue signal, or get the most likes on Twitter, but who are putting down words that will resonate with people always, and just trying for that. I mean, you're not going to succeed most of the time, but really, going for that and making Dante and Shakespeare your rivals in that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, however, that while like I neither feel like a terrible, like I'm not a metal head, and I also am less compelled by the sublime as an artistic experience than I think than you are, and maybe some other people I know are. Like that doesn't. It's not that I have no experience with it. It's just that I don't. It doesn't draw me in as much as it might for others. I do think that like a lot of what you are saying here will, like, when you say to contemporary poets, hey, stop navel gazing, stop talking about your psychology and your little love affairs and all this bullshit, step out there, stand up proud and loud and say something that matters. And let's talk about not, our small souled world as it is, but let's be more, let's make some more great souled art than ever, art which can remind us of what life can be and what human beings are capable of. I think like the great majority of contemporary poets who hear that are going to hear that as a call to say, like, what Taylor Bias was calling people to do, which is like, hey, go take part in politics, go jump into this stuff matters, the struggle is real, don't just twiddle your thumbs, let's jump in and be part of the world. And so I do wonder a little bit about, like, it does feel to me a little bit like there is implicit in what you're saying, like, hey, come do this thing. Oh, but not like that. Like,
yeah. I feel like there's a fine line you're asking people to walk here.
Right. Because I mean, and this is where I think, like, I am a great believer in irony. You're very dismissive of irony in this essay, but I think like part of my belief in irony is that irony keeps us honest. Irony is the voice that says, like, yeah, you look like, like kind of a jackass up there. And I think like that ironic questioning is what is a challenge to, self-satisfied political art. It's also a challenge to grand, crying eagle, Lord of the Rings themed metal music, right? Like it's a challenge to, like, it's the guy making the jerk off motion in the corner of the room. It's a challenge to both of those things. And I think when you kind of dismiss that, then it gets harder for one of those grand ideals to forbid the other one.
Yeah, well, it comes down to, I think, what is poetry for, and who are we looking to as our models. And so, yeah, I'm happy to do the investigation and have the conversation about, oh well, why doesn't political topical poetry fall under this? I feel like, given what the essay references as being models and as being influences and feelings that it wants to summon up, I feel like that's very different than
Oh, yeah, yeah. I don't think anybody is at risk of saying, oh, what he is calling us to do is to write preachy political poetry. I don't think anybody will make that mistake. But I do think that there are two things happening in this essay. One is, hey, there's this kind of poetry that's fucking awesome. And I love it. And actually, a lot of people love it. And it used to be really big. And like, why don't we do more of that? Because it's great. And then the other part of it is, hey, what we're doing right now sucks and is lame. What if we did stuff that didn't suck and wasn't lame and that had a greater response to like the central questions of the human heart? And I think for you, there's a sort of the implicit glue is this is actually the answer to that. And I think nobody is going to mistake you for somebody proposing that we go do protest songs, but I think a lot of people are going to feel that same dissatisfaction and sense of urgency, but they will say, oh, the better answer to that sense of urgency is powerful political statements, this sort of thing. That's yeah. I don't think anybody will think that you're saying I want more Amanda Gorman.
Yeah, and I think you've articulated some great reasons why that kind of poetry is ineffectual and not the greatest kind of poetry. I mean, maybe I should write an essay about it to clarify my stance. But yeah, I think this essay is trying to do a certain thing, and if that comes up as a postmortem question, then yeah, I'm happy to address that as well. But yeah, I agree with you that overtly political topical poetry it's ephemeral for one thing, almost by design, and also it's ineffectual at trying to do what it's trying to do, which is to affect political change. I don't think that poems in their moments affect political change all that well. Like occasionally you'll have some, work of literature like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which will actually like create reform, or I think there were a couple novels by
Tom's Cabin.
Yeah, or works of Emile Zola, they created policy changes in France. Like it can be done, but poetry rarely if ever. And also I think that that's a distraction from ultimately what I value in poetry and what I think you value in poetry also, which is the getting to the universal insights, and that is what I think it should be about. As for irony, I'm definitely capable of irony. Like I know that I'm
just saying, like, you make a point of really like shitting on it in this particular essay, and because I will champion irony.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying about being self-aware is very important. And if you're not self-aware, God help you. But I also think that irony can be toxic. I think irony can be poisonous. I think that if you are in this loop of self-criticism all the time, that's going to be partly what prevents you from attempting this ambitious art. And if we're all locked into this poisonous loop of irony, then we're not going to make the leap. And the leap might fall short a lot of the time. But I think we need to make that leap. Yeah, and as for myself, like I know that I can be pretty camp. Like, I think that's part of it.
Right, because you say self-conscious irony is a waste of time, and I was thinking, like, what is unself-conscious irony? And I think the answer is it's camp or it's bathos, right? Like if you evince irony accidentally, then that's usually a sign either that Alexander Pope is making fun of you, or that you would be a cult hit in midnight theaters in gay neighborhoods, 20 years.
Well, there's self-effacing irony, like that's self-conscious irony, and then there's irony like satire. You can be ironic about things that are not yourself, or there's Socratic irony or tragic irony. That those are not really the ironies that I'm most concerned with. I'm concerned with this sort of feedback loop, neurotic irony that I think is in a lot of artists' heads and has been for many decades.
So a question that I know came up in some of the, because I got filled in on the response to this essay online, mostly through Ethan, and a question that came up was, you do say at one point, like, it's remarkable that no one is even attempting to write poems like Homer's. And I think the response to that was like, hey, what about this person and this person and this person and this person? And I think probably, I don't know all of the people named. I'm not all that interested in trying to get into a list of like, what if this person qualifies and you fail to acknowledge him? That's not, I don't think, the point. Ethan said that like most of the people named, he did not think were actually attempting anything like what Homer did. But I think the question that did come up was, and I think maybe like a slight strategic misstep is like, my guess is there actually are plenty of people attempting that. There may be not plenty, but like I know you're attempting things like that, and my guess is we just don't know who they are, and they may not even be getting published at all. And so like one response was like maybe there are people trying it, but nobody's publishing it or nobody's reading it. And so
Right,
then
yeah.
there is a little bit of a question here because you do talk about like, hey, there's a market for epic, but then you kind of follow it up by saying like, well, except it's either prose epic / cinematic epic, which is its own thing, or it's verse epic, but it's a set number of existing famous old poems. And in that case, the market for that is less a market for epic than it is a market for classics, a market for bourgeois cultural approval, a market for being in the know on a set of things that we are expected to be in the know about if we're educated. I mean, similarly, like my understanding at least is that part of the reason that there's this relatively small number of tragedies that have survived from the three great Greek tragedians is that a lot of those were that there was an era in which new plays were produced as a live contest during the Dionysia every year. And then there was a later phase when they just did the hits. They just every year would do one of a small number of rotating big hits from the old days, sort of like community theaters today, right? And those are the texts that have then survived, or sort of like the ones that made it into that rotation. And that's not bad. These are great plays, but there is something a little bit cadaverous about that era of culture. And I think similarly, I love the Iliad, I love the Odyssey, I love the Aeneid even. I have mixed feelings about the Divine Comedy, but I'm very, very grateful that it exists and survives. And I'm glad that there are lots of translations of all these things. I love Beowulf. I love Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is a mess, but I love, but also there is not the kind of market that there is for those things because people love that form. It's a market because they are themselves the big famous books that they are. Right.
Yeah,
Which is a little bit different than any question about like writing and getting published new epic poetry today.
True, but within the realm of classics, the epic form, the epic poetic form is tolerated and even celebrated, which is, I think, much less true of contemporary things being written.
This is where I think like the New Yorker article I sent makes some kind of good nuanced points, which is like maybe the only reason people are reading Homer is because he's big famous Homer, but that does mean they're reading him, and in reading him they can start to appreciate something they might not have bothered to cultivate a taste for. So like I think like it's not purely dead. Just like when people were reproducing the Theban plays over and over and over again back in sort of like the silver or bronze ages of Greek theater, they were still putting on great fucking plays. And it did mean that people were able to experience them and be enriched in a way that I was enriched as a kid going to see like some podunk regional production of Hamlet, like it's not nothing. It does actually still matter, but I think it is still pretty distinct from any question about a live ongoing culture of production of, epic poetry.
No, and I approve of people going to read Homer or to see Shakespeare. I want us to continue to do that. But yeah, I mean, as you're saying, there are periods of fecundity and periods of sterility. And as artists, we all want to live in a period of fecundity. And so I think that, whether this is quixotic or not, if we feel like we're living in an era of sterility, we have to do all we can to shift that, to try to change it to something that's an era that is not hostile to, or at best is fertile for the production of great art.
I'll let Alice jump in. The thing I do want to say, like I very much appreciate about this essay, and I appreciate about you in general, Elijah, is that you are a very strong retort to a tendency that I feel like I encountered over and over and over and over and over again in English departments and in academic settings, where it was sort of understood that all poets should be not just humble. I think there is a certain degree of humility and arrogance is both sort of need to coexist, I think, in a functional poet. But there was sort of a need constantly to be saying like, oh, we are but shadows at the feet of the great poets of yesterday, and we can never even hope to approach the great achievements of. We're just sort of making little scratches in the sand, next to the monuments of the great poets of yesterday, and like maybe that's true, but it's so freaking pointless to say. And of course, like if you're gonna buy, like if there's any chance of making something worthwhile, you have to at least try to make something worthwhile and actually mean it. And so in that respect, like I'm very much with you in like, regardless of whether or not we agree with William Logan that we live in the age of 10, which is like nice line, Will, but it's also like a fucking, again, like pointless thing to say. Like if we care about the shit, we have to actually try to do something that is actually good and not just good for me now or good for what for this fallen. To me, it sounds like fucking the worst sort of Christianity. Like, oh well, it's all fallen and we're just sinners. Let me whip myself and put on my hair shirt and just beg to to lick the feet of the saints. It feels like fucking shut up already. Like either let's talk about how awesome the saints were, or let's try to actually do something worthwhile ourselves.
Absolutely. And that self-fulfilling prophecy of we can't do good work and therefore we don't do good work and therefore we can't do good work.
Yeah.
It's much worse than useless. I think it's deeply, deeply harmful. And I try to bring it up often because I think that's at the root of our sickness.
Yeah, and yeah. So there I'm with you, despite having like radically different instincts about lots of other aesthetic questions. But Alice, we've been talking over you, and you look like you've got a face full of thoughts.
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Because I mean, the thing is, Elijah, that this essay stings. It really stings, and like we're great friends, and so that helps a lot. But I think if we weren't friends, I'd be super fucking mad at you, and like the only way that I can approach an essay like this is to think about the practicalities. So you talk about I think what we've just been talking about in general is this, what you talk about in terms of disillusionment, right? Like we've got a self-fulfilling prophecy. We can't do good work. And so we don't do good work. We buy into this disillusionment. I don't know if it's that. When I think about the desire to write this sort of stuff, like to do the kind of work that you are hoping to see people do, I just think about the practical constraints about time and room and the ability to finish a thought. And I don't know, I mean, you say like our technologies and our living circumstances are unique. They really are unique. I don't want to get into like some kind of horrible presentism, but Virginia Woolf is in that room, and that's great when she gets that room. It's wonderful. But also when she goes home, she's got servants. Like she's always fine. So that's why I want to keep pressing you on practically. Tell me what to do then. Do I throw out all the poems about my silly little love affairs and start writing about God? Is that
Please don't do that. It sounds fucking awful.
Yeah, it sounds fucking awful. Sounds fucking awful. But also, like, I think the reason it stings is like, I think the thing that I really want to try to communicate to you, Elijah, and to sort of maybe this will people in the audience who really got this essay. I guess I just want you all to know that, like, it stings because we know it's true. I know what I'm writing is a pile of shit 95% of the time. So
That's
when
true.
I'm
That's true of all
told,
of us.
Yeah, that's true of any poet.
no, but
No, it is.
it's
I mean, you said 95%. I think I throw away close to that number of what I write, but that feels pretty good to me, right?
yeah, sure. No, that's not quite what I was trying to say.
I'd have to go back to my essay to see how I phrased it, but I don't want it to come off as if this is the one aesthetic that people should, and these are the sole set of priorities that people should always go for all the time. what I really want is just for there to be some of that, for there to be more of that. I don't think that we should all be in goose step doing the same thing. I just want there to be space for this. I want people to go for it. I want there to be a market
Yeah,
for
yeah.
it. Like, I want
But
that to exist.
that's what I'm trying to say, though, is like you're saying, I want there to be space for it and a market for it. And I don't think we've gotten actually to the reason why there isn't space and a market for it. And I think the reasons are very practical. I think they are very concrete and straightforward reasons about time and attention. And I
And
think if you ignore that, you really risk the argument just kind of going nowhere, because this is important, right? Like, this is, you want to do this work. You're making a podcast, you're writing poems, you're out there, you're doing shit. You've got so much energy. You've got like an actual goal that you want to achieve. And I just want to make sure that you don't get lost or get dismissed because you haven't taken into account people's sense of exhaustion and yeah, just their sense of like their own limitations. Does that make sense? Like, am I getting this across to you at all?
Yeah, I don't know how unique our modern situation is in that regard. I do know that the amount of successful epic poems and verse dramas that exist is very small. So yeah, I mean, most people are not going to try this, and many people who do try it are going to fail. But we need that. I mean, we need people to try and fail, because of those who try. The more people who try and fail, the more who will succeed.
Yeah,
You know,
all I'm
we
saying is I think there may be many more people who want to try and are hampered by very specific concrete things than perhaps you are allowing for. I think your argument rests on the assumption that we just don't care or want to. But like, of course, I want to write like fuck. But yeah, I want my shit to last. I want to write important stuff that matters, but I just have to work with what I've got.
we do suffer from unique obstacles and hardships in modern times, but we also don't suffer from a lot of obstacles and hardships that used to exist.
Well, I guess I didn't
And
get plague this week, so that was good.
right, I mean, you have
Yeah.
poets who are, suffering from tuberculosis who are still going for it. You know, like you have Wittgenstein in the trenches writing the Tractatus. He's still going for it.
yeah,
I
but
mean,
you also have his brother who lost his fucking arm and was a classical pianist, and so that was that.
well,
So
yeah, it
yeah,
doesn't work. It doesn't work out for everybody.
but it doesn't work. I mean, I think
Yeah.
like there are probably some obstacles we can confront and overcome, and there are others that we simply can't. And I think an example is like with film or television, which are arguably sort of the most kind of powerful, or video. I mean, really, video games, right? Or like the most sort of powerful, like like market participatory, sensorily overwhelming, massive works of art in our time. You simply can't do that on your own. The resources required are just enormous. Now, maybe AI is changing that, which gives me even more the heebie-jeebies than I had before about it. But I think there are, like, I love writing plays. I don't write plays anymore because I don't live in a place where I can really get them done. And like, it's theoretically possible that I could maybe put together a teeny tiny little company there. But then basically what I would be doing is I would be producing plays. And I don't want to produce plays. I want to write plays. And so instead, I write other things that I think I can in some way get into some sort of meaningful publication. That's a response to like physical, tangible market realities of our time, geographical realities of our time. The part of your essay that I found most kind of valuable for me was similar to what my response to the argument that John McWhorter made some years ago that drove me fucking crazy, which was, hey, Shakespeare's language is obsolete. So actually, we should just, all of his plays should be translated into modern English. And right. And so like it drove me crazy in several respects. But like the part of it I found valuable was like, well, okay. So like whether or not and like I think of like Chris Childers, who's a real like hardcore pro of a translator. And he's like, I don't need to be personally moved. I don't need to have a personal connection. I need you to pay me to translate this, and I will fucking translate it, and it will be great. Like, he's a pro. That's a separate set of questions. There are people who produce modern English glosses, or not modern, contemporary English glosses of Shakespeare, which is already modern English. But what I took from that argument, in addition to being annoyed by John McWhorter, was like, oh, the real version of that argument, the real version is, hey, these plays are amazing. They are available to artists who would like to adapt them. Like, if you want, you like do what Shakespeare is doing. If there's one of these plays, or part of one of these plays, or several of these plays that seem to invite your interest, or that capture your mind, and you say like, oh, I would like to find a way to adapt some of this same stuff into a setting that I would find more accessible myself as an audience member, that's a great opportunity. And so when I read your essay, the very last thing I felt like doing was writing metal poetry. I don't want to write metal poetry. I don't like metal. I'm not into it. I don't feel moved. I don't want to strum the iron lyre. No, thank you. I love a lot of my boring, pussy, grotesque psychological bullshit. I like it. Okay. But what it did say to me was, hey, the poetry you wish it were possible to write is possible to write. And like, if you feel like you have only been able, or you have only even just gotten in the habit of writing things that are like the kind of things that appear in the New Yorker, if you've just gotten in the habit of like, I guess this is the sort of thing a poem is, so I guess I'll try to write something that's kind of in this ballpark. If that's the habit you've got into, or if that's even the way you've come to think about it, this was a way of saying like, hey, there's other stuff you could do. It's like, there's other colors you can use. There are other rhythms you can use, as well as like just a reminder of like, hey, remember these poems? They were fucking awesome. And like, it did remind me. It's like, oh yeah, I love Beowulf. Like, fuck, that is awesome. I don't think I'm going to write an epic. Again, like, I write fiction. I'm writing a novel. Like I don't have the same attachment to the epic form, epic form, or even to like verse drama, even though I've written some verse drama. To me, I don't like that part. Doesn't matter. I don't really care one way or the other. I care about writing something that is a specific project I am working on, that I am invested in, that I think would be cool, that I think I would enjoy. And again, I think like it's worthless. It is just as worthless to try to write something metal because you think that would be important than it is to write something, small and twee and psychological because you think that that's the sort of thing poetry is supposed to do. You should write the thing that you would love to read. Right. And I think as long as you love to read things, then like I could give a fuck what Elijah thinks about irony. Right. Like, I know what I love to read, and I want to try to write stuff that I would love to read. And to me, like, that was sort of the deeper spirit of a lot of the essay, even if for you it was also specifically a call to metal nonsense.
Right. Well, yeah, it's partly an appeal to people who want to write metal nonsense, and partly because what you're describing, if everyone felt free to write the kinds of things that they wanted to write, and we would get more of what I want, and we would get more of what you want. So yeah, I'm game for that. And yeah, I don't want people to feel like I would hate to establish another phony status quo where people, I mean, not that it's possible, but if it were possible, I wouldn't want to establish another phony status quo that people feel like they have to fit into this box. Because I mean, that's how you get 18th century neoclassicism. That's how you get the fucking
somebody trying to be too much like Homer.
Right. Or the upteenth variation on Petrarchanism. It's like we don't need that either. Like I don't want all these empty poems full of Greek gods that are just there to be placeholders. Like, I don't know. I mean, it has to be vital for sure. So yeah, I like I said before, I don't want everyone to fall into some kind of goose step on this question. That's not the world I want to see. I do want to see a world in which poets are extremely excited to work on the best thing they could do, and to feel like they can do that, and that they are free and able to challenge the great writers of the past, and that they think that what they're doing is important, that they feel like what they're writing is important and can serve to influence other people's lives, to rattle their souls, and that they should be able to talk about the most important things in human life. And that as a general rule, if you want to write the most serious and ambitious poetry of your day, you're going to be embarking on a similar project that Dante and Homer were embarking on. And yeah, you're part of that tradition, and you're not in some fallen state where you can't compete with that.
Where I do think I really depart from you is in the question of like wanting to write something that's serious and ambitious and important. I think it's not that I can't, it's not that I wouldn't love for some of those adjectives to be attributed to my work. It's that I think pursuing those as goals feels to me a little bit self-defeating.
Well, why self-defeating necessarily?
Because I think it begins to be removed from, I mean, it's honestly like it's how I feel reading parts of the Aeneid. It's how I feel reading 90% of Paradise Lost is like, this is going to be so fucking important, right? Like it's the Christian moral equivalent of the Yin Yang Twin song where he says, wait till you see my day, right? Like it's like, this is going to blow their minds, but it's going to blow their moral minds. And they're going to be so blown away by it. Like to me, that's like, no. You lost the thread. The thread is your own responsiveness to poetry. Like you have to write with an awareness of your own sensibilities, which is not to say you shouldn't cultivate your sensibilities to be as rich and capacious as possible. But I think trying to write in order to change other people's lives, I don't know. I'm not sure I will ever get the hang of that in a way that doesn't feel like it ends up stepping away from the actual immediacy of the art.
Well, but you don't want the poems that you publish to be met with indifference, right? You want them to move people and to affect them.
Yeah, but to me that's different than important. Sorry, go ahead, Alice.
I think we just need to understand what you mean by changing people's lives, because I think like when you say that, it sounds like I read this poem and then I started to vote differently and was a vegan. But that's not really what you mean, though, is it?
No, I mean, there's so many other ways that lives can be. I mean, your favorite poets, Alice, don't you feel like they've changed your life? That you would be a different person if you hadn't read them?
But it's not quite like, I would never put it that way, though. It's like they were there to make life more bearable, and it was like good friends. Like I guess a good friend does change your life in a way.
It's like a good poem is like a telephone pole you wrap your car around, right? Like it was there. You did the wrapping. Like you did, it was the occasion for you to total your mom's minivan, right?
Yeah. But I do like, I'm on the same page as Matthew in terms of like setting out to do that, like sitting down, opening Scrivener and being like, today I shall change people's lives with my poem about God or whatever the fuck it's going to be. Like
Start hitting like the West Wing theme in the background as soon as you think
yeah. We're going to do a walk and talk. Yeah. Like, I just can't imagine myself doing that. But then I think, well, okay, so you can't do that, but you're an Australian fuck up. Your entire mode is like paralyzed by irony, as has been discussed. Maybe Elijah can do that, and maybe Elijah should be allowed to do that. But I do think there's a risk of it coming out already fossilized.
It can, but I think everyone
Yeah.
in the canon since Homer, who has created this, great, grand, serious work of art, has had to have that mentality, has had to be like, I'm, it like Amit Majumdar said, I'm Charlemagne. You have to go in with that mindset. A lot of times you're going to crash and burn into bathos, but there are going to be some who succeed, and we need people to crash and burn so that the people who succeed can have their work and can put it out there.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it helps you to say I'm Charlemagne, then say I'm Charlemagne. Sure.
right. This is like the professional athlete who has to like listen to rap music, boosting himself up and like decide that he's a god.
It's Kendall in the back of the Uber, with his like the first scene of Succession. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Maybe that's the actor. It's I'm curious though, because you're saying everybody since Homer who has achieved this, Elijah, but I think your list and my list might be slightly different, right? Because I think you're talking about people who are ticking certain formal boxes appropriately. And I think the degree to which poets since Homer have tried to be Homer is in many ways the degree to which they have failed. Like I think a lot of the great works of art are not necessarily those that are attempting to match the works of yesterday, but are those that are looking in the same direction, maybe,
Yeah,
as
yeah, yeah. And
works of yesterday that are responding to a reality in the moment. I mean, that's the David is carved out of a damaged piece of marble that was top heavy. Shakespeare was writing for a crowd, for money. I think like some of my favorite novels, plays were produced in response to an act. I mean, this is where I think like maybe the other essay is somewhat meaningful, because it talks about these sort of two significant forces in shaping how art is made and presented. One being patronage or market, right? Like who fucking pays for it, how it gets funded. And then the other is an ideal about how it ought to be managed or done or consumed. And either of those can have its excesses, right? Like you can easily, a pure market, purely bending to the market can lead you very quickly to a certain kind of decadence, right? But then purely adhering to a certain, a somewhat arbitrary set of ideals about what art should be can very quickly lead you into a kind of a living museum.
Yeah, well, and like I was saying about fecundity and sterility earlier, I don't want a generation of imitators. I mean, yeah, to the extent that Virgil succeeds, it's not because he's copying Homer, it's because he's inspired by Homer to make his own work, which is on a similar scale and which is attempting to deal with themes with similar power. And yeah, I mean, if you look at someone like Tolstoy, right? Like he writes a book and calls it War and Peace. Right? Like that's a ballsy move. It's not that he's trying to copy someone from the past. It's that he's saying, I too can make a big grand statement, and here it is, and it's great. It's not. I'm not saying that we should try to be Homer. I'm saying that we should look at these, great artists and works from the past and say, hey, I could do something of that order.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. Yeah. But again, I think the key is that I love, right? And not that is important, right? Or that matters, or that is one of the biggies, or that even honestly, like, I think even like worrying about what will last is a real devil's bargain. I mean, I think there is to some extent there are degrees, right? Because there's a degree to which we don't want to just be subject to the absolute, most ephemeral constructions or references of the moment, right? We don't want just to write something that will only make sense next week and not the week after. But I think taking our models for what is lasting from what has lasted is, has limited returns as a strategy.
And that's partly why slavish imitation is deadly. I mean, we've seen that happen countless times in the past. And being a student of the past involves noticing that, recognizing when art stagnates, when it fossilizes, and what it takes for something new to be created. I think that yeah, we should not try to reproduce the exact same kinds of work that have succeeded in the past. But I also don't think we need to try too hard to be contemporary, because we're going to be contemporary in our work by virtue of living in this time. Like that's going to naturally trickle down into what we do. We live the lives that we live in this time and place that we live, and that's going to affect the art. So as long as we're not being really rigid, fusty neoclassicists and trying to, produce things according to a certain letter of the law, I think it's going to make its way in there. I think yeah, we should write what we feel called to write. And really, what I want to get across is that we shouldn't be afraid to take these leaps. Like again, I don't want people to try for things that they're not called, that the muse doesn't call them to do. I think that's a recipe for failure. But if that's something that you might be interested in doing, don't be afraid to do it.
Do you
And
feel afraid?
I don't feel like I have this messianic destiny where like I'm definitely going to succeed at what I'm doing. But I do feel like, yeah, like I have the learning and the intelligence and the drive to do it. So why shouldn't I try to do it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to
And
me, that's good. Like, if you feel like writing a kind of poem, go for it.
Yeah, and I think that if we do continue to still enjoy epics and verse dramas and feel very moved by them and appreciate their beauty and their complexity and their grandeur, why should that not inspire us to write those kinds of things? Again, not aping Shakespeare or Homer, but writing things, in those forms which are still very much, they are kosher. Like you can use them. Just like, as formalists, we continue to write sonnets. We continue to write in iambic pentameter. Like we have found new ways to make that work. Why not these other forms, which have been so productive for great art and which now we've abandoned for some reason?
But that's the thing right there. What is the reason? Is it fear? I don't feel like it is fear, but maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there is a conversation out there that I'm completely not privy to where people are saying, oh God, I wish I could write a novel, but I'm so scared. I don't think fear is the thing. I think exhaustion is much more important, to recognize. And then the other thing that I would say, and the thing that I was expecting you to say when I asked you to talk about practicalities, is how do I get there? Who's my teacher? Who's going to show me?
Well, I partly,
Yeah.
I partly make the show I do because I want people to learn the tools that they can use to, write formal poetry, for instance. And people obviously they have to seek it out to a certain extent. Like unless we can pass, you know, we can instigate some kind of educational reform where, all teachers are teaching the great works and teaching people how to write, you know, in meter and are being, criticized in ways that allow them to develop into great writers. Like that's a pipe dream. That's never going to happen. I mean, but I hope to be part of a movement or a moment or an inertia of providing tools for people who want to learn about certain things to get them. And then they can, like, Versecraft is one thing. Writing an essay like this, it doesn't teach you how to do what I'm saying, but it might inspire you to look for, those resources, like to read, first of all, these books that, are fucking awesome. And then that gives you you develop a certain relationship to those things. You develop a knowingness of them. And you move on from there to, you try imitations. You write poems. You write poems that, are about the things you want to write about, and in some cases that might be, really uh conceptual ambitious things, maybe not, but we need to create this culture, this environment where people can do that.
Yeah, and I think you're part of that. I mean, you've been that for me. You've, like, listening to your show has definitely taught me things and encouraged me to go and look things up and read extra things. Very definitely the same for SLEERICKETS as well. So that you're doing that, I think I'm being such a so sort of oppositional here because I don't want you to lose people because you're too far away from the reality of their lives.
What do you think? Because you've been very gentle and polite with Elijah. Be really hard on him. Like, what do you think is the real?
I thought I was being hard. I
No,
was
you're
like
not. No, no, no.
mentally scripting
You
my
can hit,
apology text.
he's like a horse. You can wallop him. You can hit him a lot harder than that. Like, yeah. What do you think is what's the worst version of what effect this essay might have?
I think people just go, you are totally divorced from reality, and how dare you tell me what to do? How dare you tell me what to do? There are people out there with huge problems with authority. And when a
Yeah, yeah,
voice
yeah.
comes in
Right here.
and
Yeah.
yeah. When a voice comes in and says, now, here's how it is, I'm going to instruct you. There are those of us who go, fuck off. I don't want to hear it. I do not want to hear it. And so that's why I'm trying to bring in this thing of like, there's a role for persuasion here. And I know that this essay specifically is like, it's a grenade. It's, you want to sort of stake your claim, but like, I hope that there is also room in your thinking for, because I think that in your mind, the lyric poet getting published in the New Yorker is this self-satisfied asshole who's just like, ha ha, I have shash on the tradition and I'm getting paid to do it. And it's just like, they're just as insecure as like they hate themselves as much as anybody else does.
But Elijah is
And
not
so-
insecure, and Elijah does not hate himself, right? Like Elijah is like Nietzsche saying, like, I speak from a position of strength, I think. Part of what I hear when you say that, Elias, because I have some of the same reflex, but to me that feels like the super glue liar, like punk rock as like, fuck all y'all, like how dare you, you long-haired hippie, shut the fuck up, I'm gonna do this the way, like, to me in a way, like that's not necessarily a bad response. If the response is fuck you, I'm gonna do it, like I won't do what you tell me, I'm gonna do what I want to do.
Yeah, but my
Then
response is more like, fuck you for telling me what to do, and now I'm going to go cry in a corner. Like I'm going to stop working now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if you have the punk rock response, that's better than nothing. I want you to do, whatever you're doing, do it hard and do it with passion. Don't pussyfoot your way around, this vocation of poetry. Do what you're doing to your damnedest. And if that's something radically different than what I want, so be it. I mean, you're not the person I'm going to convince. It's sort of like, I'm sending out this beacon, and hopefully there'll be people who respond to it. It's not going to be all the ships, but it's going to be some of them. And I think that's really the best you can hope for. I don't think there's any essay that can be approved of and work equally well on all people. And I think if you tried to write an essay like that, it would be the most bland, insipid thing possible. And I think we have all too much of that in the literary magazines today.
That was the first half of my conversation with Alice and Elijah about the Iron Lyre and poetry manifestos in general. The second half of the episode will be up on The Secret Show in a matter of days, if not hours. You can go to SLEERICKETS.substack.com, put your email address in, and I will give you a week's access for free to 130-odd episodes that are already up. And after that, it's pretty fucking cheap. You can reach me at sleerickets@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and with any luck, I will be speaking to you again very soon. Until then.